Hello, everybody. It is Thursday, February 12th, and we're very excited to have Ben Stegink on with us. And I probably butchered it the second time too, so I apologize.
You were close.
Today we're going to talk about PowerApps tips and tricks, and a special thank you to Ben for covering Dan and I, who forgot to finalize today's speaker. So on Monday night, he very politely volunteered to take this slot. So Ben, I'm going to turn it over to you. But thank you, and everybody enjoy.
All right. Thanks, Jay, and thanks for having me. And yeah, it was, I don't know what time. Dan texted me at like 11 o'clock Monday night. He's like, what are you doing Thursday at 12? What time is it? Yeah, 11
a.m. seconds, so I knew
whatever
you were
time
awake.
It is. Well, so I was. The beginning of this week, I was doing some training for some people in Europe. So I was working 2:30 a.m. To whenever I got too tired to keep working Monday and Tuesday. But I am well rested now, and you should have my screen up now. And like Jay said, we're going to talk about Power Platform tips and tricks, and specifically around Microsoft 365. And some things that I've kind of discovered as I've played with it, different tips and tricks I've used in writing some PowerApps, some flows for various clients. So I'll try to kind of cover tips and tricks, how you do some of these things, as well as tie them to scenarios that I've used them in. So diving into the agenda, we're going to try to spend about 50 minutes. The last time I did this, I had 50 minutes. Now I think technically I have an hour, so maybe we'll go a little longer. I kind of have 4 tips and tricks we're going to look at. So impersonation, and I put it in quotes because if you have done stuff with SharePoint and specifically SharePoint Workflows, you used to have an impersonation step in there. So you could essentially elevate permissions to do certain activities. That is not always possible, particularly within Power Automate and Flows. So a way that you can kind of fake impersonation. Then we're going to look at forcing people to use PowerApps, specifically as it ties to SharePoint lists or Microsoft lists, because yes, they are actually the same thing. Looking at empowering your users, and I put management in quotes or in parentheses there, and you'll see when we get to that one, different ways you can use the Power Platform to kind of empower your users as it ties to user management. And then finally, list item attachments are bad. And particularly when you start using PowerApps and working with SharePoint lists, people can have a tendency to start using list item attachments, and some tips and tricks and workarounds there. And I'll try to leave about 10 minutes or so at the end for questions. That being said, feel free to unmute, interrupt me, ask questions as we go, throw questions in the chat. I do have the chat up in front of me, so I should be able to keep half an eye on that as well while I talk. So whatever you're comfortable with, audio, text-based, let me know. And there is a question, what should one know and learn to pursue a career in Power Platform with a SharePoint background? And then what does it require to learn Dynamics 365? Those could both be sessions in and of themselves. And then which modules one should be familiar with. I am not going to be able to speak much to the Dynamics 365 stuff. I know about this much about Dynamics 365. Maybe Frank can start a whole conversation in the chat about Dynamics 365. And Krishna, you'll find out some of the SharePoint stuff as we go, because this is a lot of how the Power Platform ties into SharePoint in different ways. So a little bit about me before we dive into it. I am the owner. I'm the Microsoft Cloud guy, the chief consultant, whatever title I feel like getting on any particular day at Intelligink, which is my own company. I started it about 9 years ago. And it's primarily just been me. I have a few contractors that do some work for me every once in a while. But I have been doing SharePoint for at least 16 years. I've started to lose track. And frankly, sometimes I don't even want to remember. But the first version of SharePoint I worked with was SharePoint 2003, and I have worked with every version since then. 9 years of Office 365 or Microsoft 365. I started with that back when it was still BPAWS, Business Platform Online Services or something like that. Can't even remember what it stood for. Yes, 2003 is absolutely forgettable, Jay. I had a client that actually still has one. They were trying to migrate off of it, and I looked at it. I think it was 2003. Oh, it was painful to see. But I have a few websites up here too. benstegink.com is my blog. Intelligink is my company. I am doing a weekly newsletter, the MS Cloud Report. If you want to sign up for a weekly newsletter, I've started doing some more stuff on YouTube as well, particularly around Microsoft 365, Twitter, and then I do have a podcast, the Microsoft Cloud IT Pro podcast. I do along with Scott Hogue. It's a weekly podcast. One just came out today, where we talk primarily Microsoft 365 and Azure from the perspective of IT pros. If you want to find me anywhere else, truth be told, there is no other Ben Stegink in the world that I know of. And I have managed to capture pretty much the entire first page of any search engine. If you search for just my name, search for Ben Stegink, you'll definitely find me. So feel free to reach out, connect on any platform. I'm a little bit more particular about Facebook and who I connect with, but LinkedIn, Twitter, anywhere else you manage to stumble across me, I will probably accept unconditionally, unless you start being mean to me. So diving into today's topic, I have essentially a slide for each of those topics in the agenda. And then we'll dive into some demos and kind of look at how we can do it, how these all work together. So impersonation. I want to run a automation. I want to perform some activities as somebody other than myself. First bullet point is really we're just faking it. There's kind of some workarounds because, like I said, there isn't an impersonation in Power Automate. What you run into is, particularly if you're using PowerApps, you can go set up your connections to a SharePoint list, to something in SharePoint, and you go put in your own credentials. It does not matter what your permissions are and what permissions that connection is created as within PowerApps. It triggers as the logged in user. So if a user does not have edit access to a SharePoint list, they can't update any items in it. They can't add items to it. However, SharePoint triggered, and it shouldn't be SharePoint triggered apps. There's a typo on my slide. It should be SharePoint triggered flows run as the user that connection is created with. So that actually allows you to perform certain activities as long as they're triggered by the SharePoint list and not by the Power App. And that's how you can kind of fake that impersonation. So if we dive over here to, and sorry, you're gonna have to look at my ear now because my monitor that I'm demoing on is kind of kitty corner to my camera. So let me go pull up my browser here. And I created a Power App just for this presentation that actually has all of these different bullet points in it. So the first one is impersonation. And what I created out here to show how this works is I have two different lists here. I have a Microsoft 365 tips and tricks list, and I have a Microsoft 365 tips and tricks data list. And what you'll find is if you go in and look at this tips and tricks list and the permissions for this list, I inherited it from the site permissions. So if I go in and look for this demo user 1 that I'm going to use, you'll see they have edit access. They're part of the demo team members group. So they are able to add items to this SharePoint list. If we go back to my lists and we go look at this tips and tricks data list, and we'll look at the same thing here, our site permissions and our advanced permissions, and go check permissions here. Oh, did I end up in the wrong list? Oh, I ended up on my site, I believe.
Yeah,
yes,
I think
I ended up on my site. Wrong one. List settings. That's what I wanted. Permissions for my list. You can see my site owners are here. So my members aren't here. This one has unique permissions. If I go look for demo user one here, check now, has no access to this data list. Going into this Power App, I created two different forms. This one submits or tries to submit to the data list, and it is just a connection over here. And you'll see tips and tricks data. All of these connections to SharePoint were created with my user account. This user account has full access to both of those lists, has full access to everything. So this is a form submitting to my super secret data list. This is my form submitting to a normal list. If I jump over here to my demo account now, I have the same Power App up, and I can go in and submit right now. So this is a test submission with some random text. And if I try to submit to that list as my demo user, submit data, it's going to try and try and try, and you really won't know if it worked or not, other than the fact that it doesn't actually reset the form. It just kind of spins for a while and does nothing. Versus if I go submit it to my normal list here with some more random text and submit to normal, it's able to do it just fine. So that demo user got blocked from this data list, even though they don't have permission to it, but I'm still connected with my account, versus over here where they are able to submit to the normal list. And if I jump back now to my work account, go look at those different lists, you'll see over here, here's my other test submission. This is the one that worked fine, is that demo account. And if you actually look at, I should have put the created by column. Whoops, not created, created by. Created by column on there. If you would have caught it before it moved, it was created by demo user one. If we go back and look at my data list now, you'll see this other test submission moved over there. My initial test submission didn't work at all. So what is going on in the background here is, like I showed you, that Power App is always submitting, or that Power App would submit to tips and tricks. And I just went out and created a simple flow in the background that's in a different environment. Where I have my Microsoft 365 tips and tricks. It is a very simple flow with 3 steps in it. When an item is created and I'm actually connecting with a PowerShell admin account, go ahead and create a new item in my data column, and then delete or in my data list, delete the item in my original list. The scenario this came up with was I had a client that wanted to create something like, think HR, where you want to create a Power App or some type of form for employees to go in and submit maybe issues they may have, fill out some type of report or some other type of information on this form, but you don't want anybody else to be able to see the data. It's sensitive information. They're submitting it, they're trusting that it's just going to HR, but HR wants to have all that information, but you obviously don't want other employees to see it, so you need to be able to write it to a secure location. You can't keep it in that original list because anybody can go in and see it. They can edit it, they can view it, they can read it. If you're getting a lot of submissions, you don't want to have unique permissions on every item in the list because that can lead to its own management issues. So we went in and did this. We just said, okay, here's the form. It submits to a list. It could be a little more hidden. It doesn't have to be on the site that the Power App is maybe hosted on. It submits to some other site. But then as soon as it submits, or as soon as that flow picks it up, it uses those elevated permissions because it was triggered by a SharePoint list item being added, not by the Power App submission, and copies it over to some other secure list somewhere and deletes that original submission. So it doesn't just have to be SharePoint. It could be any other actions that you may want to run with some of those elevated permissions, where some action happens in Power Apps, some action happens on that front end, and you need to run some actions as another account. Just trigger a Power App or trigger a flow within Power Automate off of some addition to a SharePoint list, go do all those actions you need to as elevated permissions, and you could come back to the flow later if you needed to. But that is my tip and trick for how you can actually fake that impersonation within Power Apps, Power Automate. And I will show another example of where we kind of took that a little further in one of the next demos as well, and did that impersonation to do a few other activities. So diving back to my PowerPoint, next one, force them to Power Apps. This can kind of go hand in hand with the last one, where people are filling out a Power App. You have certain rules in place. Maybe it's cascading lookup fields. Maybe it's when a field is read-only versus not read-only, when a field is visible versus not visible within the form. That's submitting it to a SharePoint list on the back end. And again, to submit it, users have to have add permissions. You could go in and maybe remove their edit permissions within SharePoint, remove their deletion permissions within SharePoint, but that doesn't necessarily make sure that they adhere to all the rules that you configured within Power Apps or those conditional lookup fields. So what you really want to do is, when they're adding items to the SharePoint list, and if they have to edit them, you always want to force them into the information, or you always want to force them into the Power App to make changes to the list item. So how can you do that? Because there's several different ways that users can edit SharePoint list items within SharePoint. It's not just by clicking on the new button or clicking on the item. So there's a couple ways we can go in and block some of those permissions. Deep linking is something that's within Power Apps. I used to do it by updating, by creating a new column that had a deep link in it and kind of hiding the title field. April Dunham has a great YouTube video out there, and I can share the link if you're interested in watching her whole video on it, of how you can actually update the title field within a SharePoint list to force it to open up in Power Apps. And again, then removing some of the edit ability. So Ralph said, yes, please. Let me go grab these two links out of my notes. I'll post them in there. Just go watch them after this, unless you're already bored of me, in which case you can go watch the YouTube video. Whoops. But how do we do this one? So diving into our next one, force the Power Apps. Here, again, I created something relatively basic. I just have 3 fields up here. I did add a little label up here so you could see the list item ID. Ralph has said, see ya. Thanks, Ralph. I appreciate it. So let's go fill out an item. This is the, we'll do the Nova item, some text box. I am super creative with my text boxes. And my choice field, something here, choice 2. Go ahead and submit it. I thought I fixed that. It should reset the form. Apparently I did not fix it on that one. It should have brought up a blank form on there. Anyways, this went out. It's submitted to my list. And let's go to my, we don't need this one anymore, Microsoft and its love of tabs, or Office 365 and its love of tabs. Here is that list that it submitted it to. Here's our Nova item. Here's our text boxes. This is just my normal title field. And you will see if I click on our Nova item, instead of opening it up in SharePoint, it actually pops us over into that same Power App, opens up this item, our choice fields. I did fix it. I don't know why it wasn't doing it. I can go in and edit my item. You'll see I'm in list item ID. We can switch that from 2 to 3 and go back and look at this one now. Oh, it refreshed. It did catch it before I could refresh. And now I updated this to choice 3. So perfect. That works. That title field is great. But what if they click the checkbox and go click the information pane? Oh, I turned that off. They can still edit the item over here, update our text box, and now this got updated. They didn't go through the Power App. There is a nifty little setting over here in the SharePoint list item where you can go into list settings, advanced settings, and scroll down to quick property editing and flip that over to no and click OK. Now, when you go back to your Force Power Apps, if I would click this and try to edit it, all of my fields are read-only. I can't edit them. I can't change them with the apply label, but that's just a special field. So I have now blocked properties. If I click edit all, it actually loads a completely blank screen. You could, in theory, make this where everything here is read-only, just like you did with the property pane. Same type of thing if they click new here, they just get a blank field. So the only way that they can go in and make changes now is to have the link, and it could be the link that we've created within the title field. It could be links that you place elsewhere. You could create a link to that Power App anywhere within your site so that they can actually go open it up and submit new items. So how did we do all of this? The title field is this nice little format this column. Formatting the column, we can go in and look at our JSON here. And I have to harness every bit of my developer-y resources. Oh, Visual Studio Code moved over here. All this has in it is you can copy and paste all of this, and the only change you need to make is you grab this URL right here to your Power App and replace this URL within your, place this within that title column formatting to point to your application, and then use whatever query string parameter you want on there to pass the ID into the Power App. Everything else stays the same. Just replace that one line of text or that one string, and you're all good with the title field. In order to block the information pane, all I did was Power Apps, is I just went in and customized the form. And this is where I was super lazy because I just wanted to show that you could block it. All I did within this customize the list item is getting things ready and loading. I went in and found my form screen that has all of that information on it. I changed my visibility. Not of that one, not of the screen, of the form itself. So the screen still loads, but then I set the visibility in my SharePoint form to false. So it's essentially loading this blank Power App where everything is hidden on it. Again, I could have made this true, and then I could have gone into each one of these and set like the display mode on these to broken it, set that to view only so that it still would have loaded, but everything just would have been in a view only state. that takes care of our title field. That takes care of the information pane, creating new items, editing new items. Once you get into the Power App itself, it's actually really simple then to grab the query string. And this is in that blog post in the chat, April has this code that you can paste in. But when your app loads, all you're doing is looking for that parameter, which in my case was I was passing an ID in the URL. It sets a variable to the ID from that parameter, and then I set it to navigate to the forced Power Apps screen. I have a transition on there, you don't need it. And then I set the item, or that variable item, to looking up that field, looking at that item ID, and loading that item based on its ID. If there's no item ID, it just loads it blank. So now I have the item in this variable. And then within each one of these, I just set it to, if it's blank, if the item is blank, load nothing. Otherwise, put the title in there, put the text box value in there, put the choice field in there. That's all there is to it. And I agree, Ralph, they should add a tab component because doing a whole bunch of screens and showing and hiding stuff is just a pain. But that's what we have for now. So that's that deep linking, is being able to pass that parameter in, that ID in as some type of value, go in and look it up, and then just set all of these. And then when you click save, it's just going in and updating that, submitting that form, setting that variable again. And I did this, I had to reset that variable item so that my Power App actually refreshed with my new values instead of continuing to load the old values from that item I loaded in. So this gives you a way to always force those users into Power Apps so that they have to edit and update items from within Power Apps. I've had to do this with a couple of clients. I have one client where they wanted to track, they're actually using Power Apps and SharePoint lists to track some of their patient information. And there are a bunch of different rules and tabs and screens, and they couldn't have people just updating the list. One, it had a whole bunch of SharePoint columns in it, and it was a pain to look through, to sort through. They needed a nice user-friendly way to do it, and they really didn't want people just doing it in the background in a SharePoint list. So we did something like this. We forced them, no matter what they clicked, they had to open up that item right within Power Apps and make all of the edits to that list item in Power Apps. It can't add or remove. Oh, how the tabs could be. Yeah, it would be interesting to see how they would build it out. It's not, I mean, it's not terrible to do it now. It just ends up getting a little messy. And if you do groups and screens, but yeah, that would be interesting to see how they would actually create a tab component. So keeping an eye on my time, trying to stay on track. That is how you can go through and force Power Apps to be used in those various scenarios where you do want to keep users from updating that list data any other way. One other thing to call out too, when you do set that list, see, now I'm losing my tabs again. Do it this way. When you do set that checkbox too, to set this as read-only, it also does block the quick edit. So if you would go in and try to, I don't even have quick edit on here. If you would go in and try to update that view and do like the quick edit or the quick edit table, the quick edit view within the SharePoint list, it also blocks that ability to do that. So there really is no way for users to kind of do that quick edit in those two different ways within that SharePoint list. In other words, when you're editing the team's editor for the app. Yeah, so that gets interesting, Ralph. I haven't tried to take all of this yet to Dataverse, and if you are doing some of this in Dataverse, Dataverse has been on my list to look at for a really long time, ever since it came out, and I haven't had a client use it yet, and I haven't just had a day or two to go sit and dive into all of it. Yeah, I like the fact too that you can start putting it in the CDS database, because SharePoint lists are great, but there's a few of these that I have started getting worried about the size of the SharePoint lists and how it is going to continue to grow, just because I've always told people SharePoint is not a database. But there's a lot of people, myself included, that when you start doing some of these PowerApps in SharePoint, people, it's a pain to work with a SQL database. Like, SharePoint kind of turns into a database by default because there's not a whole lot else to do there, or not a whole lot of other options. But Dataverse kind of opens some of that up. So next up, play from my current slide, is Empower the User and User Management. This is an app, and I'm going to show some screenshots of the app because of the nature of this app. It's really hard to demo it live, and I'll show you some examples of. Yeah, exactly. That's my thought. Like, I like the Dataverse and the database relationships and some of that, but I'm gonna have to go play with it some more. I can't show this one live. I have kind of a little semi-demo of this, but some of these screenshots really show you what you can do with the app. So this is, HR doesn't always give you all the information. I'm going to start with the scenario here so it makes more sense. You're onboarding employees. Employees are going on a leave of absence, and not to throw HR under the bus, but HR is not always great at giving IT all of the information that maybe you want within Azure Active Directory, whether that's phone numbers, employee IDs, addresses, any of that. They tend to just be like, this user's starting, we need a user account for them. And if you don't have anything set up, if you're not using like some HR management system where data's flowing everywhere, sometimes IT is literally, let's just go in and create this user in Azure AD or in Office 365. So how can you use the Power Platform to take some of that out of the hands of IT, give it to HR without actually giving them permission to Azure AD? I know I don't want to give any HR departments I've worked with access to go in and just start modifying stuff in Azure AD or give them the permissions within my environment that they need. I kind of want to control what they're going to be able to do and not do. So for this client, we actually created a Power App. And they have, I like my tabs, they have 4 tabs. They have a tab for new users, for editing users, for terminating users, and then for placing users on a leave of absence. So this is one of those where we did dictate. We're like, okay, when you create a new user, you need to put in a first name, a last name. We calculate the display name, employee ID, hire date. Username is automatically generated based on first name, based on last name. And then they also have a couple different companies as a part of the parent company. So based on their works with over here, as well as actually based on their office, this username may have a different domain associated with it. The format of the username may be different. So we go in and calculate all of that out with the username. They can input a supervisor, a department job title, select the office, and that automatically fills in the office or the address for that office. And then their password is shown on the screen so that HR can copy it, have access to it. They're going to have to reset it the first time they log in. And it does get sent then in an email, much like Office 365 does when you create a new user, so that that username and password is there. They click create a new user, and it goes out and creates this new user in Azure AD. Editing users, same type of thing or similar type of thing. They're given their whole list of users. They can search for a user based on name, username, select a user, go in and edit some of the information, Some of it, like username, we don't want them going in and messing with UPNs because that may lead to problems. Employee ID is not going to change, hire date. So if some of that has to change, they have to contact IT. All the other stuff, HR is fine to edit, save those updates, and it goes and makes those updates in Azure AD. Terminate, show all the information when they select a user, but they're not going to change anything. Terminate immediately or submit a termination request, and it goes out on a certain day. Maybe someone put in their 2 weeks notice. They know when they're going to quit. They want to go enter all that information in now so that account's automatically disabled on that date of termination. And then leave of absence, same type of thing. They're not editing any information, but they want to be able to place users on leave of absence, say when they're going to return from leave of absence. And all this is doing is in the back end, going in and actually updating or disabling or enabling that Office 365 account within Azure AD. This is one of those that kind of ties into the earlier ones we talked about. There might be something in Dynamics, but then it requires you to have Dynamics. Who wants to go buy Dynamics? It's expensive. But there is some stuff out there too in Dynamics, I think. This ties into some of the other ones too. Yeah, for those that already paid the money. You got it, Ralph. You may or may not want them to edit this user information in a SharePoint list, and this also ties into the impersonation one. So I mocked one of these up over here, where I go to empower the user, and this is in my environment. We can do some display name here where it is my Nova demo user. Lunova demo user. And you can see here, I did something similar where I'm filling in that username. It could go in and edit it. And I have a new password button. This just goes through and generates a whole bunch of random passwords. You will notice it's always uppercase letters, 3 numbers, and 3 lowercase letters, and make sure it complies with what Office 365 requires for a new user account. Once you have a password you like, you have all that information filled in, you click create a user. I'm doing this as my account. You could also do this as that demo account. And what this is doing in the background, we'll go into my PowerApps. The first thing I have to do is when I have to figure out how to create those passwords. When this screen becomes visible, I am actually going in and creating 3 different arrays, one with all my uppercase passwords, one with or letters, one with all my lowercase characters, and one with all my numbers. This one I actually don't use anymore. This was my first attempt, but when I randomized it, I wasn't always getting the right mix of characters to make it functional. Is there a masking function in PowerApps? I mean, in theory, I probably could. I could just not show it. Where that's like a hidden field within the PowerApps canvas. So I could still do all of this and purely set the visibility of, yeah, I could set the visibility of wherever that label is to false, and it would still all be there in the back end, but you wouldn't be able to see it. I can't remember if you can set a property on a field to mask it or not. But then when I click new password, going into that, it takes all of those variables, and I had to do them in arrays like that because of what was available to me in PowerApps, where it shuffles that array of characters. It shuffles this array of characters, it shuffles this array of characters, then it goes in, yeah, you like that? Shuffle. There's no random, it's a shuffle. I shuffle everything around, shuffle my deck of cards, and then I just pull out the first 2 from uppercase passwords, the first 3 from my numbers, and the first 3 from my lowercase passwords. So doing this has worked to generate a good password. And then my create user, this is where that impersonation comes in. It actually just submits this to a SharePoint list. So I have a SharePoint list out here on my site that has now gone away amidst all my clicking. Team/demo. No, wait a minute. I don't want to leave this one. Let's do it over here. Where I will go in and look at my site contents, and it just submits it to my tips and tricks data user management. It submits it to this user management. Here's my Nova demo user. My password was here, but in the time I was talking, my password has since been removed. And this is that impersonation step I talked about, where it actually goes in and just creates a SharePoint list item. And then I have a separate flow that triggers off of this SharePoint list item that runs under those different credentials that actually has access to Azure Active Directory to go make all my changes. So I'll go back to my flows over here again. My flows, look at my tips and tricks user management flow. And this one is going in when a new item gets created within my user management list. So here's my user management tips and tricks. I initialize the variable, I end up not actually using it or needing it. And then I created that connection again to Azure AD using my account. So because I triggered this from a SharePoint list creation, it runs under my account instead of the user account that submitted it, and just goes in, it does enable the account, sets display name, mail nickname, password, user principal name, submits that all to Azure AD to create the user. I can fill out some of the additional properties here. When I did this for the client, I did have to go trigger Azure Automation as well to run some PowerShell to update all of the items, because not all of the Azure AD properties are available in the Azure AD actions within Power Automate. And then the last thing I do is I go in here and I set that password field to null. So as soon as that user is created and I'd want to email that password or save it somewhere else in the meantime, because I don't even know what this user's password is anymore. But nobody could go back into that list and find that password within a minute or two of that new user account being created as soon as this flow is run. So if I jump over now to my azuread.portal.azure.com and go look at my users, all users, Nova, here's our Nova demo user that has already been created. It has its user account, object ID, all of that is set up. Again, I just submitted a couple things. Apparently first name and last name, I didn't even put in there. But now you can give this app to users that you may want to be able to manage users within your environment, make it nice and simple, control what they can update, how they can update it, without actually giving them elevated privileges or elevated access into some of those admin portals and admin centers within your Microsoft 365 environment. So the client that has this app, they have literally handed all of that user account management off in terms of creating new users, editing users, placing users on LOA or leave of absence to the HR department. As they select different dates, essentially it just pauses the flow until that date is hit, so they can actually place the user on leave of absence. And if they're going to be back within 30 days, because there is that limit on flows, they can schedule their return at the exact same time, and those flows will just sit there, place them on the leave of absence when they're leaving, re-enable their account when they come back, and all HR has to do is be able to figure out how to click around in a Power App. So again, it kind of takes, it's one of those ways to, an example of a way you can take some of that management out of the hands of IT, use some of this Power Platform to really grant some of that power to your users or your HR department or whatever group of people that is to help you manage your Office 365 environment. So my last tip, list item attachments are bad. PowerApps, and you may have already seen it, there is a huge difference, Frank, between model-driven apps and Canvas apps. It sometimes amazes me that they're both actually called PowerApps because they relate to each other pretty much no way whatsoever. Other than that, you can use CDS with both of them. That's about the only similarities between them, as they can both leverage CDS. But list item attachments are bad. When you start working with SharePoint and with SharePoint lists, there is, oh, I would love that, Frank. When you start working with lists, there's always those list item attachments. You start creating a form for SharePoint list items, and inevitably that add attachments to it pops up. If you want users to be able to store lists or store files, associate them with list items, it works, but you never know how many files are attached unless you open the list item. You can't really do metadata, retention, DLP, sensitivity labels on them easily. They're kind of all buried within that SharePoint list item. And then you run into search issues of how do I find all of these files that are attached to SharePoint. And I do have to say thanks to Shane Young on this one too. He has a 30-minute YouTube video on how to do all of this. I can put this video in the chat as well if you do want to go watch this after the fact and follow along with his video. So let me throw this one out there. There is Shane Young's video. This is something that I have been trying to do for several years. Shane talks in his video. He was trying to do it for at least a year. Finally, somebody mentioned something and it clicked, and he just beat me to the YouTube video in terms of how to do it. So I just use his and refer to his rather than doing my own. But what this does, there you go. Well, now you have it, Ralph. You don't even have to go look for it anymore. What this one does is list item attachments is now, instead of having that typical list item attachments here, you can see I already have some files out here that I uploaded. You can go click attach a file, browse through your files. Let's go grab this one, open it. It uploads that file to a document library. I threw these out there just to kind of show the file contents, and it already popped up down here. That's funny, Ralph. Yeah, it's always that you need to find those demo ones, right? So now I have a list of all these files that have been uploaded. I can go open a file. It opens it right up there. If it's a Word document, I can open a file here. It'll open it in Word Online. Excuse me, I can refresh it, and I'll show you why I put this refresh button on here. And then I can also open the folder. So this open folder actually takes me to a SharePoint document library where here's that file I uploaded already. I could also go in here and do a new PowerPoint presentation and click. I'm not going to bother adding a title. Great, it's already been saved. Ooh, here. We'll make it look pretty. At least made it look pretty. Tips and tricks. Now I have this new presentation here. If I actually jump back to my Power App and refresh it, there's my presentation is already there. You may also see I have 5 of them here. If I go look out here, there are 6 of these out here. One of these was actually modified by demo user. If I jump back over to my demo user account, that is buried in here. It's not that one. Where'd it go? There it is. Jump back over to my demo user, list item attachments. This user only shows, load the files. This user only shows 1. Yeah, SharePoint. SharePoint has needed help since SharePoint 2003, Ralph. There are certain things that SharePoint just needs help with. Oh, I didn't know there was no image field. So this file is here. If I open the folder, it is that same folder. I actually just set a filter on there to only show the files based on who modified it, edited it, whatever that may be. So this lets you store all of these files in SharePoint. The way this one works is it's a whole lot nicer, and it's really not that complicated to set up. So if I go edit my app, and let's jump over to my list item attachments, alluding to what Ralph's frustration is there was no image control. This is an image control. So this one is actually this media, not that media control. It is, no, was it that one? Go watch Shane's video. Upload. It was the add picture, that control. This image control is actually what this file attachment is. There isn't a file attachment one, so you do have to leverage the add picture control. And when it adds a file, so that picture control has an on add file, it goes in and it does have to do some work on it. So it grabs that attachment and it grabs the file contents. So you'll notice it's file content.image because it's an image control. And then the format is a JSON format, include the binary data. And you do have to trim some stuff off. So if you go into where I have this one open, you will see up here, it does have this initial information about the file itself that ends with a comma. And if you scroll all the way down, there's a little bit of information as well at the end that also has a comma with it, which it was nice that they made it so easy. So on that file attachment, you have to go grab the file data that's between those two comments. So that's what this is, and this is just setting the variable file content only. Once you have this variable file content, you go launch a flow and you pass in, I just grabbed the attachment name because I pass in the file name, and then the file contents is just that file content that you grabbed up here. And I actually do return the link to the file. So after the fact, if I do want to put the link to the file somewhere within the Power App, display it somewhere, I do have that file link. Back within our flows, all that flow does is back to here, edit this flow. Power App calls it. It's just a create file. Site address, folder path, create the file name is passed straight in. You do have to convert that base64 to binary for it to work, but it's just that function with the file content that you grab from PowerApps passed in, and then I respond to it. So I have that link with the URL and the path to that file, and that's what's returned. Those 2-3 things are all you need to do in order to start uploading files to document libraries instead of attaching them as list item attachments. Everything else on here is just standard controls. This is just a gallery control within PowerApps that is filtering out this document library. So there's a data connection to my document library here for the files, and it's filtering it out by the created by email. This just refreshes my data connection. Open folders is just launching that location right within launching that location, the URL of that location. Open file just grabs this link or this item and the link to it from within the gallery. So nothing else within here there's nothing else fancy going on, nothing else that we're doing other than those actions on the upload and then that Power App. You may have to do some tweaking to this control in order to get it to look good. You can just go fiddle with colors, with layouts, with displays within there. in order to clean that up so it looks good. The example I did this with, I actually did this with a Power App for a patient, and I can show you this one as long as I don't click around in it because there's certain data in here. But this is what that typical attachment, file attachment control looks like if you're doing it to a list item. We went in and once we figured this out, started adding it to a document library. And what they do is they actually have like patient IDs and file paths and various information to filter out files within a document library to actually show documents related to that patient because of how they're just stored, how they're sorted, stored within SharePoint. And that allows them to just pull back files related to a patient by using different filters within the gallery. So they can still do all of the DLP stuff, the HIPAA stuff, the PII stuff within PowerApps or within SharePoint and those files in the document library, keep all of that data secure. And also it gives them that ability to bulk upload those files, kind of like we did when we created one, to that SharePoint library, rather than having to do everything through the Power App. If they get a dump of 10 or 15 files related to a patient, they just upload them to the patient's folder within SharePoint, and they start showing up with all the patient information in Power Apps. So that is my tips and tricks with a couple minutes to spare. Again, if you do want to reach out, websites, a bunch of Twitter accounts, email, feel free to reach out to me on any of those platforms. Connect with me on LinkedIn, any of that. If you have any questions, I haven't gone through all of them yet. Is there a way to find which iPad, Android the request came from? I have not tried that, Krishna. If you can grab like a device ID or a name, I'd have to look at that. So I'm not sure. I know you can grab location, but I'm not sure about device information. You're welcome. Yeah, maybe some sneaky, although you don't have any HTML fields and you have markdown fields. I haven't tried putting HTML in the markdown control. Well, I have. I've done bold, maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure. That would be interesting. If you don't have any other questions, I don't know if Dan or Jay, if you have any final announcements or anything else you need to say, but thank you all for having me. Susan, I'm glad you found it informative. Hopefully everybody enjoyed it, was able to take away a little something they can go play with, something they can go try. But it was fun. I enjoyed it.
Ben, thank you so much. Ralph, Ralph, as always, with lots of questions. And everybody for your participation. Thank you today. If you want to know more about what we have coming up, we meet twice a month, the second and last Thursday of every month for lunch, or at least for lunch on the East Coast. If you want to learn more, go to nova365.ms, and that'll bring you to our meetup where you can jump in on any of our future sessions. You can also find us on LinkedIn under Nova365, and we've got a group there where we post all of our videos so that you can see all of the past sessions like today. So Ben, thank you so much. Really excellent session. I look forward to sharing this with a few of my coworkers who are interested in kind of getting a little smarter on how PowerApps works.